Something felt off the moment the final whistle blew. A kind of tension that didn't fade when the crowd emptied or when the cameras stopped rolling. It lingered in the air like something had snapped deep inside the Browns organization. Something bigger than a single loss or a bad night. People inside the building could sense it instantly. The frustration wasn't the normal post-game disappointment players shake off by the time they reach the locker room. This was heavier, almost unsettling, as if everyone had just witnessed a moment they knew would change the course of the season. Coaches stood stiff and expressionless. Veterans paced without saying a word. Even staff members, the ones normally unfazed by chaos, exchanged quiet looks that carried the same message. This wasn't supposed to happen. And underneath all of it was the unspoken truth nobody dared say out loud, that the team didn't fall apart because of the opponent. It fell apart because of a decision that went against the instincts of almost everyone on that sideline. And once that decision was made, the entire night spiraled into something Cleveland may not recover from anytime soon. Inside the building, it became clear almost immediately that this loss hit differently. Players who usually brushed off mistakes with quick jokes or shoulder shrugs stood frozen in place, staring at the field like they were trying to replay the night in their heads. Veterans who'd been through every kind of setback, injuries, blown leads, heartbreaking finishes, looked genuinely stunned. Younger players whispered among themselves, exchanging the kind of nervous glances usually seen during a trade deadline, not after a regular season game. Even staff members, the ones who usually keep their heads down and avoid emotional swings, moved with a quiet stiffness that revealed everything they were thinking but couldn't say. The sideline during the game had already shown hints of this breakdown. People close to the situation described it as a slow, unsettling shift. First confusion, then disbelief, then a kind of collective frustration that became impossible to hide. When another drive stalled and another opportunity slipped away, players stopped reacting with the usual optimism. Instead, they watched the coaching staff, waiting for a change that never came. And as each minute passed, the decision everyone expected hung in the air like a storm cloud refusing to break. What made this moment so unusual wasn't just that the Browns were struggling. It was that so many players, from rookies to longtime starters, shared the same silent question: why are we still doing this? For some, the answer seemed obvious. For others, it felt like they were watching the season unravel in real time because of a choice nobody understood. And even though nobody dared speak it out loud, the weight of that confusion pressed harder with every failed possession. But as tense as things were in that moment, the real unraveling was still ahead, waiting to unfold in ways nobody in the organization was prepared for. From the very first drive, it was clear the offense wasn't just struggling, it was sinking. Every possession felt like déjà vu in the worst way. The reads came late, the timing fell apart, and the ball rarely left the quarterback's hand with any confidence. Receivers were breaking free downfield, creating separation the way coaches dream about, only to watch the ball die 5 yards short or drift hopelessly into a defender's waiting arms. The rhythm that usually settles in after a couple of snaps never arrived. Instead, each play felt like a desperate attempt to fix what had already gone wrong on the snap before. The mistakes weren't isolated either. They stacked on top of each other, piling higher with every drive. Footwork that should have been clean looked frantic, almost panicked. Throws that needed to hit tight windows arrived just a split second too late. And each miss drained a little more energy from the offense. You could see it in the way linemen walked back to the huddle, and how receivers shook their heads after another wasted route, and how the sideline's usual chatter faded into a quiet, growing frustration. Meanwhile, the defense kept trying to pull the team back into the game. Big stops, clutch plays, moments that should have flipped momentum, all of it wasted within minutes. The offense trotted out, stalled, and handed the pressure right back. Over and over, the same sequence unfolded until it stopped feeling like a bad stretch and started feeling like a pattern the entire team recognized but couldn't escape. What made this collapse sting even more was how preventable it looked. Everyone on that sideline could sense the gap between the talent on the field and the results on the scoreboard.
It was the kind of breakdown that made players glance toward the bench, toward the one person they believed could change the entire direction of the night. And standing just a few yards away, helmet in hand, was the player they thought could do exactly that, Shedeur Sanders. But still, he wasn't being called upon. Shedeur didn't stand on the sideline like a backup waiting for mercy reps. He stood like someone who knew he was ready the moment his name was called. Helmet strapped, eyes fixed on the defensive coverages, pacing with the restless confidence of a quarterback who sees the field before he even steps onto it. Reports from people near the sidelines suggest he wasn't zoning out or sulking. He was locked in, reading tendencies, tracking adjustments, and preparing as if he were already running the offense. And players noticed. They always do.
Veterans kept drifting closer to Shedeur after each stalled drive, not saying much, but communicating everything through the looks they exchanged. Younger players lingered nearby too, drawn in by the energy he carried, even without taking a single snap. According to several people familiar with the sideline atmosphere, it wasn't just belief in Shedeur's talent, it was belief in what he represented, a chance to turn the game before it slipped completely out of reach. Every time the offense fell apart, more eyes shifted toward him, as if the solution was standing right there, waiting for permission to step in. But the coaching staff stayed glued to the plan. Their focus remained on Gabriel, committed to the decision long after the momentum had crumbled. And that's where the silent divide began to show. Players wanting to win gravitated naturally toward the quarterback they believed could change everything. Coaches, meanwhile, held firm to their hierarchy, doubling down on loyalty instead of adaptability. No one said a word, but the split spoke loudly. The sideline didn't look like one unified group anymore. It looked like two different visions of the team's future, standing only a few yards apart. And as the game pressed on, the tension between those visions grew more obvious, tightening with every missed opportunity. What nobody realized yet was that all of this silent frustration was building toward one moment, a flashpoint that would push everything past the point of return. The turning point didn't arrive quietly. It slammed into the stadium like a shockwave. When Gabriel threw yet another drive-killing interception, the entire atmosphere shifted in an instant. What had been frustration turned into something louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. The crowd rose to its feet, not in celebration or anger at the opponent, but in a unified demand aimed straight at the Browns sideline. According to people seated close to the field, you could feel the sound building before you even heard it, a low rumble turning into a chant that shook the lower bowl. Two words, over and over, echoing through the stadium with growing force: put him in. These weren't casual suggestions from fans tossing opinions into the air. These were pleas sharpened by hours of watching the same mistakes repeat themselves. Eyewitnesses described the noise as overwhelming, so loud that players on the bench turned, startled, trying to understand how the entire stadium had suddenly found the same voice. It wasn't about disrespect toward Gabriel, it was about desperation, a collective belief that the night was slipping away while the one player with the ability to flip the script, Shedeur Sanders, waited untouched on the sideline. And then came the moment that sent a jolt through everyone within sight of the Browns bench. Shedeur, who had been standing ready for most of the game, calmly walked toward the coaching area, helmet in hand, eyes locked straight ahead, no theatrics, no anger, just unmistakable certainty. Multiple people close to the situation say the sideline fell silent the moment he approached. Players stopped mid-sentence. Coaches briefly froze. It was the look of a competitor who'd watched his team fall apart and finally couldn't stay quiet through inaction. This wasn't a stunt or a challenge, it was the breaking point of a player who knew he could help but wasn't being allowed to. Players around him understood immediately. Some nodded slightly, others simply stepped aside as he moved forward. It wasn't confrontational, it was clarity. A quiet statement that he was ready, willing, and fully capable of taking over. But in a decision that stunned nearly everyone watching, the coaching staff turned back toward the field and sent Gabriel out again. That single decision was like pulling the plug on the stadium's energy. Fans who had been roaring fell into stunned disbelief. Players exhaled in frustration, some dropping their helmets against their legs in visible resignation. And with that choice, the divide that had been quietly brewing on the sideline became impossible to ignore. Because in that moment, it no longer felt like the Browns were fighting the opponent. It felt like they were fighting themselves.
And what followed after that decision would push the entire organization into an even deeper level of chaos. The walk back to the locker room felt heavier than the loss itself. Players moved in near silence, helmets dangling from their fingers, shoulders slumped in a way that didn't come from fatigue, but from something deeper. People who were inside that hallway described the atmosphere as almost eerily quiet. No music, no light trash talk, none of the usual noise that fills the space after a tough game. It felt like everyone had just witnessed a moment they couldn't shake, a moment that said more about the team's direction than the scoreboard ever could. Inside the room, the divide showed itself without a single word being spoken. Veterans who normally addressed the group stayed silent, sitting at their lockers staring straight ahead. Defensive players who had spent the entire night fighting to keep the game alive looked drained in a way that went beyond physical effort. Reports suggest they weren't angry at Gabriel. They understood he fought hard and did what he could. Their frustration centered on something else entirely. The decision that kept the quarterback they believed could win the game, Shedeur Sanders, standing on the sideline untouched. Receivers looked defeated, untying their cleats slowly after running route after route that never mattered. Linemen leaned back against their lockers, exhausted from protecting drives that led to nowhere. Some players avoided eye contact altogether. Others packed up quickly and slipped out without speaking to anyone. According to several people familiar with this scene, it didn't feel like a team reacting to a loss. It felt like a group trying to process the idea that their belief in the coaching direction had just taken a hit.
Even staff members, who usually move around cleaning gear and prepping for media availability, did their work quietly, as if unsure what to say or how to act. The mood didn't carry anger so much as disappointment, deep, sinking disappointment in what the night represented. Players understood the difference between losing and being let down. This felt like the latter. And through all of it, Shedeur sat in full uniform, helmet resting beside him, not saying a word. He didn't need to. His silence spoke loudly enough. Players glanced toward him, not with blame or resentment, but with the kind of frustrated respect that comes from knowing their best chance never stepped onto the field. The feeling hung over the entire room like a weight nobody knew how to lift. But for the Browns, the real storm wasn't what happened in that locker room. It was the reaction that waited outside. Because once the doors opened, the fallout spread far beyond the walls of the stadium, igniting a firestorm the organization never saw coming. The reaction outside the locker room didn't build slowly, it detonated. Within minutes of the game ending, national reporters were firing off posts that hinted at internal tension and visible frustration on the Browns' sideline. Former players turned analysts jumped in almost instantly, some saying they couldn't understand why the coaching staff stayed locked into a plan that clearly wasn't working. Others questioned whether the locker room could survive a decision that looked, from the outside, like coaching stubbornness overriding competitive logic. It wasn't just criticism, it was disbelief, broadcast live across every major network. Sports talk shows seized the moment before the players even left the stadium. Clips of the stalled drives, the turnovers, the sideline reactions, everything was replayed frame by frame. Commentators pointed out how often receivers were wide open, how the offense kept missing opportunities, and how Shedeur stood ready the entire time. Some analysts even mentioned what insiders had supposedly been saying for weeks, that the gap between the quarterbacks was wider than the public realized. All of it framed carefully, of course, as speculation or rumor, but the message was clear enough. Something didn't add up. And then social media truly erupted. Browns fans flooded timelines with two wildly different narratives. On one side were the Gabriel defenders, people arguing that he knew the system, followed the playbook, and did everything the coaching staff asked. They blamed the offensive structure, the injuries, or the pressure he faced. They insisted he wasn't the reason the team fell apart. But the other side, Shedeur supporters, came in like a tidal wave. They pointed to every missed throw, every stalled drive, every spark the team never got. They posted clips of Shedeur's explosiveness, his arm strength, his ability to extend plays, and argued that the coaching staff ignored the obvious solution. Some fans claimed the staff was protecting their guy. Others said the offense was being held back by fear of change.
And while much of it was speculation, the volume of it made the entire conversation feel like an unstoppable force. As debates grew more intense, the tone turned increasingly hostile. People online weren't just criticizing play calling, they were questioning the entire direction of the franchise. Threads filled with fans arguing about trust, leadership, favoritism, and whether the team could afford another season defined by the same mistakes. Comment sections became battlegrounds, echoing the same division that had formed on the sideline hours earlier. Even neutral analysts couldn't help but weigh in. Some framed it as the beginning of a quarterback controversy. Others went further, describing it as the first public sign of a deeper organizational issue. Rumors about players being frustrated started circulating, always marked with phrases like "reports suggest" or "sources claim," but repeated enough to gain momentum. Broadcast panels debated whether the coaching staff had lost the locker room or if this was simply a bad night magnified by circumstance. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines, radio shows, podcasts, fan forums, national segments. What should have been a forgettable early-season loss turned into a full-scale narrative about direction, leadership, and whether the Browns were wasting their competitive window. And under all the noise, one truth kept growing louder. The real damage wasn't done on the field. It was done by a decision that left everyone questioning what the Browns were really prioritizing. But even all that chaos wasn't the most dangerous part. The real risk now was what this controversy meant for the future, because the storm the Browns were facing had only just begun. What made this moment truly dangerous for Cleveland wasn't the loss itself, it was what the loss revealed. For years, the Browns had been trying to build something stable, something competitive, something capable of surviving in a division dominated by elite quarterbacks and high-pressure games. They invested in a top-tier defense, surrounded the offense with weapons, and constructed a roster built for immediate success. On paper, they were supposed to be entering a window where every season mattered. But nights like this don't just bruise the season, they threaten the entire foundation holding it together. Around the league, front offices and executives pay close attention to moments like this. When a team publicly fractures over a quarterback decision, it sends a message, one that free agents and draft prospects notice. Reports have already suggested that players considering Cleveland will be watching closely to see whether the organization values performance or politics. Because no matter how talented the roster is, nobody wants to walk into a building where trust feels fragile and direction feels uncertain.
Inside the Browns facility, the pressure now shifts squarely onto the coaching staff. Every decision Stefanski makes from this point forward will be viewed through a microscope. Every practice rep, every press conference quote, every depth chart adjustment. Everything becomes evidence people will use to determine whether he's doubling down on the same path or trying to regain control of the locker room. And that's where this situation becomes bigger than a quarterback battle. It becomes a test of credibility. Coaches don't lose teams all at once. It happens in tiny moments. Hesitations, questionable calls, refusal to adapt, until those moments stack so high that players start believing their leadership doesn't truly give them the best chance to win. And once that belief cracks, repairing it becomes almost impossible. Some in the organization quietly fear that this game might have been one of those moments, the kind that sticks with players long after emotions cool. And the truth is, the Browns now stand at a fork in the road with no safe path forward. Either Gabriel proves everyone wrong, silences the doubters, and validates the coaching staff's loyalty, or Shedeur Sanders eventually steps in and shows exactly why so many players were frustrated that he didn't play sooner. Both outcomes carry consequences, and neither of them lets the team avoid the central question this night forced into the spotlight. What matters more, protecting a decision or pursuing a win? This is the crossroads every franchise dreads, the point where direction becomes uncertainty, where momentum becomes hesitation, and where a team's competitive window can quietly start to close without anyone realizing it until it's too late. Cleveland isn't there yet, but the path they choose next will determine whether this moment becomes a wake-up call
or the start of a season defined by what could have been. And as the dust settles, one truth presses harder than the rest. Everyone inside that locker room knows exactly why this game slipped away, even if nobody wants to say it aloud. Everyone in that building felt the same thing as they walked out of the stadium, that the loss wasn't about being outplayed or overwhelmed by the opponent. It was about a choice that reshaped the entire night before the game ever reached its breaking point. Players don't need film sessions or closed-door meetings to understand what happened. They lived it. They felt the momentum slip away, watched opportunity after opportunity fall flat, and saw the one player capable of flipping the script stand untouched on the sideline. And while nobody will say it in a press conference or whisper it to the cameras lined up outside the locker room, the truth sits heavy on every person inside the organization. The Browns didn't lose because they couldn't win. They lost because the coaching staff refused to make the one move everyone believed could save the game, putting Shedeur Sanders in. It's the kind of moment that lingers long after the headlines fade. Players remember decisions like this. Fans do too. And as the season moves forward, this night will hang in the background, shaping every question about leadership, trust, and direction. Maybe Gabriel will bounce back. Maybe he'll silence the noise and prove why the staff stayed loyal. Or maybe Shedeur will eventually get his chance, showing the spark so many people saw the moment he stepped onto the field with his helmet in hand. Either way, the decision made in this game won't be forgotten because it exposed the tension between what the team wants and what the coaches believe. And now the Browns enter dangerous territory where every misstep feels amplified and every choice becomes a test of whether the organization truly wants to win or simply wants to be right. The players know it. The fans feel it. The rest of the league is watching closely. What happened on that sideline wasn't the end of a story. It was the start of one. A story that will follow Cleveland into every game, every press conference, and every tough moment the season brings. And deep down, whether anyone admits it or not, everyone already understands the truth behind this loss, even if they'll never say it out loud.